Good morning. This is the time and place for the Planning Hearing Officer hearing for August 31st, 2011. My name is Laura Stotler, and I will be conducting the hearing as Planning Hearing Officer today. We have two cases on the board, and relevant exhibits are posted on the panels located directly behind me. Under the provisions of Title 30, Chapter 30.42 of the Glendale Municipal Code, a conditional use permit shall be granted if four required findings are present. They are first, that the proposed use will be consistent with the elements and objectives of the general plan, that the use and its associated structures and facilities will not be detrimental to the public health or safety, the general welfare, or the environment. 3, that the use and facilities will not adversely affect or conflict with adjacent uses or impede the normal development of surrounding properties. And 4, that adequate public and private facilities, including utilities, landscaping, parking spaces, and traffic circulation measures, are or will be provided for the proposed use. One of the conditional use permits requested today also involves the sale, serving, or consumption of alcoholic beverages. So for those cases, there is an additional criteria. If we have 5 criteria that would be considered in making findings for alcoholic beverage permits. 1, that the census tract with more than the recommended maximum concentration level of on-sale or off-sale uses be considered. Crime reporting district location of the existing or proposed use with a crime rate which exceeds 20% of the city average for Part 1 crimes as reported by the Glendale Police Department. That the existing or proposed use does not or will not adversely impact any church, public or private school or college, daycare facility, public park, library, hospital, or residential use within the surrounding area. 4, that adequate parking and loading facilities are or will be provided for the existing or proposed use, or other reasonable alternatives satisfy the transportation and parking needs of the existing or proposed use. And 5, that notwithstanding consideration of the criteria named above, the existing or proposed use does or will serve a public necessity or public convenience purpose for the area. We also have an application today for a parking reduction permit. And there's additional criteria that apply to parking reduction permits. The request today is asking for a parking reduction permit subject to criteria D under section 30.50.040 that requires a finding of facts. It says for any other circumstances where the applicant wishes to request a parking reduction, such reduction may be granted where the review authority finds that first, the parking need for the land use is not as great as for similar land uses, or the parking requirement for the land use established in the zoning code is greater than what will be needed by the land use. And 2, the intent of the parking regulations in compliance with all other applicable provisions of this chapter is met. And 3, sufficient parking would be provided to serve the use intended and potential future uses of the subject parcel. So with that, if the evidence presented in today's hearings and in the applications meets the criteria just described, then the planning hearing officer can either approve or impose conditions for approval on the case in question. If the findings of fact are not evident, then the request will be denied. Notification of this hearing was accomplished by the use of public notices which were mailed to property owners located within 500 feet of the subject property, physically posted on the site in question, and placed in the local newspaper. So the hearings will proceed as follows. First, I'll read a description of the application and request. Then I'll read the reports received from other city departments or other letters of communications that we've received from interested parties. Then the case planner will make a brief overview of the case, give analysis, and make a recommendation. The applicant will then be asked to come forward stating both name and address, and will be asked to present the case within a 15-minute time limit. I do want to stress that it's up to the applicant to make the required findings. Others in support of or in opposition of the application and interested parties will be asked to come forward to speak, again clearly stating both name and address within a 3-minute time limit. Lastly, the applicant will be given the opportunity to make closing comments if desired in response to testimonies given by preceding speakers within a 5-minute time limit. The hearing will be closed and the case taken under submission, or a decision may be made today. After the hearing, the decision will be prepared in writing and will be in the form of a letter sent to the applicant and to all persons who responded to the public notice either by speaking at this hearing or by submitting written responses, and also who have provided their name and mailing address. The date of the decision will be the date appearing on the letter. Under the appeals provisions of Title 30, Chapter 30.62 of the Glendale Municipal Code, The decision may be appealed to the Planning Commission within 15 days of the date of the decision. Again, not the date of the hearing, but the date the letter goes out. Anyone wishing to appeal may obtain forms and brochures on the procedures form from Building and Safety Section, Permit Services, which is located on the same floor of this building. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on one of the speaker's forms, which have been provided by the front door, and submit it to our planning assistant. The forms look like this. And right now I only have one form, and I see multiple people in the audience, so if you do wish to speak, please fill out a form. I would also like to inform everyone that today's hearings are taped, and the tape will be part of the public record. So for the first case, we have is located at 1425 East Colorado Street. That's for the Arco Food Market. That's conditional use permit PCUP 2011-011. The applicant is Susie Fung. The property owners are Howard Aguilar and Virginia Choa, and the case planner is Gabrielle Riza. This is an application for a conditional use permit to allow the off-site sale of alcoholic beverages, beer and wine, at an existing food market located at 1425 East Colorado Street in the C1 Neighborhood Commercial Zone, described as a portion of Lot 72 Watt subdivision. Right now, it looks like this case had a noticing error. It was not properly given public notice. So we are going to continue this case to September 7th, 2011. If there's anybody here to speak on this, I don't have any cards, so I'm assuming we have nobody here to speak on this. But if you did want to speak, you're welcome to if you're here. Otherwise, we'll just continue, as I see no takers for that. So this case will now be continued to September 7th, 2011, with proper notice given. The next case I have is located at 2833 to 2837 Honolulu Avenue. This is a vacant property. It was formerly Montrose Collection. The new business name is proposed to be Chandelier. It's conditional use permit PCUP 2011-017 and parking reduction permit 2011-003. The applicant is Alfred and Ramona Teichert. The owner is Alfred and Ramona Teichert. The case planner is Milka Toledo. This is an application for a conditional use permit and a parking reduction permit to legalize a change of use and expansion of an office to a new full-service restaurant offering the sale, service, and on-site consumption of all types of alcoholic beverages without providing 9 additional parking spaces, located at 2833 to 2837 Honolulu Avenue in the C1 Neighborhood Commercial Zone, described as lots 12 and 17, and a portion of lot 18, track number 6067. There is a note, it was on the public notice. This area was originally permitted and occupied by the previous business operator. Upon revocation of the previous parking reduction permit, the expansion and originally improved entitlements became null and void. The new business operator is proposing a new full-service restaurant, which requires applying for a new parking reduction permit and conditional use permit. So with that, I'd like to go over the comments that I've received so far. We do have several letters from the public. We have one that says they're not in favor. They have parking problems from the building all the time. It's the same old expletive, so I'm not going to read that. No more drunks or crazy drivers in the middle of the night. So this is a concerned neighbor. We also have a letter written from Mark Trueblood. Indicates he is concerned about the conditional use permit and parking reduction permit because they've had a historical problem with a parking lot being used as overflow parking when the restaurant and banquet hall was in operation in this location. They said that's been the case for the last 20 years, and they hope it's not repeated again. And Mr. Trueblood is the property manager for the adjacent property at 2849 and 2931 Honolulu Avenue. We also have an email from Judy Taylor. Who is concerned about that this could turn into a banquet hall. And she's against any concessions for the proposed business. Says they were worried about they were aware of the existing problems when they purchased the building, and they believe that a parking exception should not be provided. And we have another email that we've received from Dan and Sherry Stebbs. They're residents of North Glendale. And they say they're concerned members of the community, and they're concerned that the past history of Montrose Collection Banquet Hall and Restaurant would be repeated with this new permit. And they're concerned that this property backs onto residential, and they're concerned that the parking problems and noise levels will migrate into the neighborhood adjacent. And they're urging that the CUP and parking reduction permit be denied. Then we have comments from the police department. Police department's noted that they have to comply with the ABC license. They'll have to make applications for that. That the sales, consumption of alcoholic beverages should only be allowed between 11 and 2 a.m. These are really standard, that restaurants shall remain open at all times to the public during business hours, that this not be a banquet hall and remain a restaurant. They're recommending that there be no video machines maintained on the properties, dancing only allowed on the premises in designated dance floor areas, music or noise shall be contained within the establishment, no music will be allowed on or outside in dining areas. Business shall comply with all state and local laws and ordinances concerning excessive noise and disturbing the peace. Off-site sale of beer, wine, or distilled spirits should be prohibited. An establishment that primarily provides for the on-premise sales, serving, and consumption of alcoholic beverages, and that derives more than 50% of gross revenues from the sale of alcoholic beverages, by definition, a tavern, and requires approval of a separate conditional use permit. So they want to make sure this is actually a restaurant and not a tavern. And they're noting the business will be responsible to provide for adequate parking, including free valet service if needed to accommodate patrons. They are concerned about parking. The business establishment will be responsible for maintaining cleanliness and preventing loitering of patrons in the area where patrons park. Neighborhood Services noted that on July 5th, they conducted an inspection and found following code violations: an unpermitted enclosure of the front walkway patio area constructed with wrought iron fencing and gates, and in conjunction with the front enclosure patio area, existing parking spaces have been reduced in size. And Neighborhood Services recommends that these violations be corrected prior to any entitlement approval. And I know that outdoor area is still there. At least it was there as of yesterday. Traffic section has noted that the code-based parking shortfall of 9 spaces could potentially impact on-street parking supplies and our other off-street parking supplies. We have comments from the redevelopment agency. They said the project will not have an adverse effect on their section. Then we have standard conditions from GWP Electric. They've noted that there's no conflict for service for this building. They already have service. And the urban forester does not have concerns with the project. Public Works has noted that they have to comply with best management practices for stormwater. That's standard. And that any addition of food service facilities shall be in accordance with the use and occupancy requirements of the Building and Safety Code. So there's some notes about required plumbing upgrades that may be required. And fire engineering has just noted that standard fire code requirements apply. Building department has noted that all necessary permits will need to be obtained. And And the additional or other building code requirements or specific code requirements such as Cal Green may be required upon submittal of plans for building plan check and permit. And then we do have a notice from the California Department of Alcoholic Beverages Control where they've noted that a license is pending for a general eating establishment. And that concludes the comments that I've received. I'd like to ask staff for a presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Stotler. I am the case planner, Milka Toledo, on this case. Some of the information I'm basically going to go over you've already stated. However, I may mention it again. Don't mean to sound repetitious. One thing I'd like to start off with would be with the previous permits for this location at 2833 through 2837 Honolulu Avenue, and that will segue into why the applicant is here today requesting these new entitlements for the CUP and the parking reduction permit. So the previous conditional use permit on file is 7501-CU, which was granted with conditions back on October 27th of 1983. And the parking reduction permit case number PPR 2005-002 was granted with conditions on August 5th of 2005, which was to allow the expansion of the previous full-service restaurant into an adjacent office space without providing the required number of parking spaces. Looking at the floor plan, that particular office area or former area is actually located, let me approach the board, right in here, approximately.
Okay.
This is where it used to be, and it was, again, previously was an office area. At that time, upon the expansion, they were required to obviously increase the number of parking spaces for that particular area. And that's why they had applied for the parking reduction permit in the first place. So what occurred was that due to code violations, the City Council approved findings of fact back in March of 2009, March 24th, 2009, revoking the parking reduction permit, and then subsequently the zoning use certificate was also revoked, and that was 2006-0234, PZUC 2006-0234. And so the reason why they're here today, again, is because they are proposed, because that area became null and void, or those entitlements, upon revocation of those entitlements and the zoning use certificate, because now the new operator, or the new business operator, is proposing to legalize or maintain that former expansion, they have to go through the whole process all over again. And that's why they're applying for a new conditional use permit and a new parking reduction permit, because the previous parking reduction for 9 spaces, again, no longer exists. And that kind of puts the project into context in terms of why they're here today. In terms of the zoning, that has not changed. It's still a C1 neighborhood commercial zone. The building is located in a multi-tenant commercial center on the north side of Honolulu Avenue. The site contains other uses on the site, including an office area and a beauty salon, in addition to, of course, the proposed full-service restaurant. There is an existing common driveway which serves the site, as well as the abutting commercial retail center to the west. There was question as to if there's some sort of easement or driveway easement for the use of that particular common driveway. The applicant did submit a document that he has, however, that did not clear, upon reviewing it carefully and with our staff, it didn't seem to indicate if there is a driveway easement. So maybe perhaps
This is the only legal access that we're aware of, and this is for just questions.
That's right, correct. And in addition, you mentioned that there are some comments that were presented by Neighborhood Services Division due to existing code violations on their property related to the patio enclosure. And then, of course, as a result of the patio enclosure, it has reduced some of those parking spaces in front. So if you're going to be looking at it in terms of dimensions and do they meet our standards today, there's certain, not all of them, just a few, they would not meet the minimum dimension. That's why they have, obviously, a code violation for that. And again, that's as a result of my understanding of the previous business operator.
Okay.
I'd also like to note that they are noting that there are 26 spaces, and we will, throughout the presentation, continue to reference 26 spaces. Upon a site visit, I counted 24, so I'm not very clear on that, and perhaps the applicant can address that. In terms of the conditional use permit request and the analysis it'll be a combination of both the CUP and the parking reduction permit. The applicant, as I stated, is proposing to legalize the 1,210 square foot former expansion that originally was expanded by the previous business operator, and that's where they expanded their restaurant into that adjacent space. So, as I stated, upon expansion, additional parking was required for the change of use from the office to a full-service restaurant, and the expansion resulted in a shortfall of 9 parking spaces. During its operation, as I stated, they had several code violations, and due to noncompliance of the entitlements that they had at that time, those entitlements over time were revoked. The new applicant for the project is actually the property owner, Mr. and Mrs. Teichert. Their intent is to establish a new full-service restaurant offering the on-site sales, service, and consumption of all types of alcoholic beverages and not provide the required additional 9 parking spaces for that expanded approximately 1,210 square foot area. The total proposed area with the expansion for the restaurant alone would be 5,342 square feet. And as I stated, the site contains, according to the applicant, 26 parking spaces that would be utilized by the restaurant and the other commercial tenants on site. A full-service restaurant is a permitted use in the C1 zone, and it is conditionally permitted with the offering of alcoholic beverages. The on-site consumption of alcoholic beverages may be detrimental to the safety and public welfare of the neighborhood. In general, the request is to serve alcohol in expanded area, floor area, and since inadequate parking is provided to serve the expanded area, it can be anticipated that overflow parking may spill over into the neighborhood. And according to the zoning code in Chapter 3042.030F4, conditional use permit for alcohol service cannot be granted unless adequate number of parking spaces are provided. And there's no evidence on record that the 26 parking spaces on site will adequately park approximately the 118 patron seats shown on the floor plan, even if all the businesses on the site were closed. According to the police department, the property is located in Census Tract 3006, which allows for 7 on-sale establishments. Currently, there are 32 establishments in this tract, which denotes an overconcentration of alcohol in this census tract. Based on Part 1 crime statistics for this census, in 2010, there were 112 crimes, which is 44% above the citywide average of 78. While there is a high crime rate in this area in particular, according to the PD, most of the crimes are related to theft in local retail stores in the area, which again encompasses the Montrose Shopping Park area as well.
Okay.
However, within the last calendar year, there were no calls for police service at this location, mainly due to the fact that the previous use had been closed. I'd like to just briefly go over what the requirements are for parking in terms of what the parking requirements are for the office versus a restaurant, and if we were to be considered brand new, so we can put all the requirements into context. An office use requires 2.7 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area, and the new full-service restaurant use requires 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area. As a result, as I stated, there is a shortfall of 9 spaces based on the square footages. While it is not anticipated, of course, that the sale of alcoholic beverages will intensify the parking demand, the expansion of 1,210 square feet, or 1,210 square feet, will intensify the use. Given that at full capacity, the proposed restaurant could seat approximately 118 customers, and that would not include the lounge area or the employees, providing only 26 spaces to accommodate the restaurant patrons and employees and neighboring businesses in commercial center would not be adequate to accommodate the potential parking need created. The existing restaurant, as proposed, is considered, well, in this case, the site on which the restaurant is located is considered legal non-conforming as it relates to the minimum parking requirements. Had this 5,342 square foot restaurant building been constructed today, 53 parking spaces would be required, and based on 10 per thousand. And as previously mentioned, only 26 spaces are currently on site to serve the 3 different uses on the property, including the full-service restaurant. Therefore, if the entire commercial center had been newly built, 62 parking spaces would have been required, and as proposed, the project requires, in this case, 9 additional parking spaces. So while the proposed 26 parking spaces for the project are not adequate to provide sufficient parking for the restaurant and the rest of the tenants on site, and that's mainly staff's concern and why we are recommending denial of these 2 entitlements. While the applicant does state that there is public parking, in this case, public parking lots approximately 5 blocks away, and then the employees will be encouraged to use public transportation, staff does not believe that this justification is realistic, and in addition to that, no evidence was provided to back up this assertion. And lastly, the applicant did prepare a parking demand study that they prepared, and the document provided some information regarding the site, the hours of operation, the parking demand during on and off peak hours. They did include information regarding the size, for example, of, as noted on the floor plan, the serving area, the kitchen, the office areas, but it fails to demonstrate how the parking need for the restaurant is not as great as for other similar uses. And that's one of the findings that needs to be made. So therefore, based on that alone, that particular finding cannot be made, and therefore staff cannot recommend approval of that entitlement. As you know, all 4 findings for the CUP would need to be made, and even if one were not able to be made, one could not, in this case, recommend approval on the project, in addition, as well as the parking reduction permit.
Okay.
That basically concludes staff's presentation, and I've attached draft findings for you to review. If you have any questions, I am available.
Well, I do just want to clarify one point, that when it comes to the parking reduction request, that, well, I understand it's a non-conforming building, and while it may be 9 spaces short in terms of just the code, in terms of making findings for the new request, which is the parking reduction permit, there's a finding that says sufficient parking would be provided to serve the use intended and potential future uses of the subject parcel. I just wanted you to clarify that that means it doesn't matter what the code requirement is necessarily for that finding. That means sufficient parking is sufficient parking.
That is correct.
Thanks. I don't have any other questions at this. I guess I do have another question at this point. When we're talking about the 9 spaces short, that's based on having 26 code required
Correct.
parking spaces, and at the site, when you counted, it was 24
That's
spaces
correct.
on site, and some of those didn't meet the size requirements.
That's correct.
Yes, okay.
Some of the
And-
angled parking spaces in front of the enclosure
okay.
did not meet the minimum parking dimensions in terms of,
In this area right in here?
correct.
Okay. And then you have evidence that may or may not prove that there's access for this driveway. Do you know if it talked at all about use of parking in this area?
Well, my understanding is that the subject site does utilize the parking to the east.
I guess I'm concerned if we have a joint driveway, do we have a joint use agreement where this people can use these parking spaces too?
Not to my knowledge.
If it's working, does it work both ways? That's my question. Do they have a right to use this parking? Do they have a right to use this parking?
I'm not aware of that. As a matter of fact, I spoke to one of the property owners of the adjacent commercial center to the west, and I believe you have a letter from Mr. Trueblood.
Yes, I do.
And he actually explained to me, as a matter of fact, over the phone, his concern, which was that he's concerned of the spillover onto his parking lot or commercial center, because that has been the case in the past. So he did not, that would indicate to me, and he did not mention that they have some sort of agreement that they can utilize, let's say, 6 parking spaces located along the westerly side of their property.
I'll ask the applicant, maybe they have further information. All right. Okay, next, I would like to call the applicant forward. I only have one speaker's card, so if there's other people who would like to speak, would you please submit a speaker's form? Fred Teichert, please?
I go by Teichert.
Teichert, sorry.
My wife goes by Teichert, so. All right. Who, is it just you that I am dealing with today, or is it
Yes.
James and?
It's just me today.
It's strictly you? Okay. If I may, could I give you one of these pamphlets
Sure.
you have? I'll get you
Okay,
one.
thank you.
And one. And would anybody else, are you part of the hearing committee or anything? No. Would any of the other people in this paper? Mrs. Thompson, I believe. Okay, this is a brief, first of all, I've got so many questions, I don't know where to begin. Would you like me to answer the parking question first?
Well, what I think you might want to do is go through all the findings of fact for your parking reduction permit and also your conditional use permit, and then as you go through those findings, you could answer the questions.
Okay, well, I just got the summary of, this was just given to me about 15 minutes ago, the City of Glendale Planning Hearing Staff Report, so I wished I had had that earlier to go through it. And
Did you want to see your application? Because you would have had to make those, you had to explain your findings as part of your application.
well, I can,
You're welcome to look at that if you'd like to take a look at that. That's for your CUP.
okay.
Thanks. You'll probably need also one for your parking reduction permit.
Well, I would like to answer the
You'll need this one too.
the easement situation. From what I understand, and I gave a copy of the trust deed to Milka Toledo, and it said that we owned not only the 4 or 5 lots, but also an extra 5 feet into Section 18, I believe it was. And that, in my opinion, is what is necessary instead of an easement. I actually own the property. So I think that clarifies that.
Does that go all the way through the driveway or just halfway through?
Yes, the driveway.
Okay.
Yes. That's an extra 5 feet of the next portion is my property.
Do you own 5 feet here, or, because this doesn't, what you
Well-
submitted doesn't show the property line, so I'm just trying to determine.
From where the parking area is, no, to the left, right there. That's all the parking area in there. farther west, yes.
Okay.
There's an extra 5 feet that I own. It's in the trust deed in the legal description.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to put some of the participants here who think that we probably have a problem. I am the last person in the world that wants a banquet hall. I think that will put a lot of people's minds to rest. I do not want a banquet hall. I do not want a bar. I do not, there's 2 bars up the street, which heaven knows we don't need another biker's bar or anything similar to it. We want a full-service, family-oriented restaurant. As far as some of the code violations, yes, there probably are some. For example, the enclosure that was mentioned in front of the restaurant. It was put up by the previous owners, and I was not notified or told when it was put up or how it was put up, but darn it all, when something is put up illegally and the city of Glendale finds out it is illegal, they should take immediate steps to correct the situation, not let it go and let it go and let it go for 5 years. Let it go. That's not right. There should be responses. And I have been, as you see, I've taught school in Glendale for 50 years, and I have always operated with rules and regulations, and that is what I intend to do.
But were you the property owner at the same time the other use was going on?
Yes.
So you were responsible for the property even though you had a tenant that was violating
I was
the law.
responsible, but if I didn't know what was going on there, if something was done without me. Now, the code violations of the fence or the enclosure, fine, I'll do what I have to do. Take it down, move it back, whatever has to be done. I am law-abiding, and I will make changes if I have to.
Did you authorize the expansion of the restaurant into what used to be an office before?
I did not authorize it, but when it was expanded, I was under the impression, and I may have gotten a paper saying it was done legally with a permit. It has been done with a permit. If you will look at page 2 of my papers here, page 2, these are consideration points which I feel are most important. Permission to expand the 1,210 square feet was approved by the city of Glendale. It was approved. Therefore, it had to have permits and been registered. The next one, previous owners were granted parking reduction permit. Yes, they were granted one. How come they were granted one? That's all I'm asking for, is the same thing that the previous tenants had. They were granted a parking reduction permit, and I believe that I am entitled to a parking reduction permit. Now, they had the banquet situations, which was against the law, and the city, I'm sure, did everything they could to close them down, and they did the right thing by closing them down. I was very happy when this happened. I even assisted Mike Garcia. I assisted him, and hoping that we could do something to get the situation cleared up. Because the parking situation, when it was a banquet hall, they might have 200, 250 people come at one time. And yes, there was an overflow. They had a valet service. And I will say, however, it was controlled. And some of the neighbors may complain that up on Hermosa, the next street up, they used for the parking facilities. But all you have to do is go on Hermosa today. At this time, you will see cars on both sides of the street It's not the restaurant that used any of the parking facilities in the neighborhood.
What would you do for overflow parking? If you have 118 seats and you
Well,
have maybe 24.
First of all,
how would you work?
Now, I'm not sure of the protocol that you have for this meeting, but if I were to suggest something else at this time, would you consider it in making your decision?
No, I can only consider what was legally noticed.
We can just consider what's
Consider what was noticed,
On the plan.
what you've applied for, and what we noticed.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that I am willing to downsize some of the facilities because, honestly, we don't need all the space we have inside.
When you say you're willing to downsize, would you redo the approximately 1,210 square feet addition that
That's
was
what
the
I'm
office
referring
and
to.
make it back?
Now, it can't be the 1,210 square feet because the previous owners, if you look at the floor plan, the
Move the
place...
restrooms.
They have the restrooms. Those restrooms are probably a third the size of the room that we're in right now. They are humongous. And there is no parking. I don't think we're going to have to worry about 5 or 10 people being in a restroom at the same time. I mean, the two restrooms comprise over 300 square feet. And that's due mainly because of the handicapped facilities that needed to be installed. Okay, the next point that I would like to make, the Chandelier is not going to be a banquet hall in any sense of the word. The restaurant is going to be a full-service restaurant. And if you'll look at the next section, I even gave you a menu of what is going to be proposed to be in there. And it is a first-class, family-oriented restaurant. We are not going to close off and say, oh, the public, you can't come in today. We have a private party going in here. That's ridiculous, and I'm not for that at all. That also takes care of the next one. And the last point I would like to make, was it 5 minutes you said to
Go ahead, there's nobody else. I have
to speak?
nobody
Okay,
else.
we've got plenty of time here. We're asking that we be fairly treated and not even remotely connected with the previous owners. My little thought that comes to mind is, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The previous owners were granted a parking reduction permit and a zoning use permit, and I'm asking for just what they were granted willingly. Now, I know the city of Glendale has gone through unspeakable times with the previous owners. I understand that aspect of the situation, and I feel sorry for everybody who had to get involved in any of the lawsuits that were going on. I give them my sympathy, but that's what. Could I specifically answer any questions that you might have?
Well, you still have the findings that I need to hear for the conditional use permit and the parking reduction permit. So if you'd like to go through those.
I'm not sure what you're
application.
referring to on this paper.
Yeah, let me show you. You have findings of fact, which we need to make,
You'd like me to?
and I need you to go through them. The first one is that the proposed use will be consistent with the elements and objectives of the general plan.
How will the proposed use be consistent with the various elements and objectives of the general plan? Well, the history of the restaurant is it's been there for almost 60 years. It's been Mexican, it's been Italian, and Mexican and Italian again, I guess. But through the years, it has been a full-service restaurant, and they have never had large groups of people. There's never been any problems. I have never heard of any problems that they've had at the restaurants. Even when it was a banquet hall, it was, I would have to say they had security there and they had no problems. Now, the valet parking parked out on the street, there is excellent parking in the street, and I know we can't use that as part of the subject matter to qualify for a parking reduction permit. But there is excellent parking on the street on both sides of Honolulu, which is a very busy street.
Okay.
Why will the proposed use and associated structures and facilities not be detrimental to the public health? First of all, it will be supervised by the health department. It has a great reputation, no problems of the environment or safety that I have heard of. Maybe somebody else has knowledge, I don't. Next one, it's why will the proposed use and facilities not adversely affect or conflict with adjacent uses or impede the normal development of surrounding properties? As I say, there's never been any issues. The neighbors, we have not heard any complaints. I have never heard one complaint in the 6 years that I've owned the property. Not once has a neighbor complained to me, or the police have never contacted me or anything. The parking lot is kept very clean, as the neighbors will attest to. I clean it up myself, take good care of it. Shrubs are watered. Everything is nice for a small community parking lot. The next one. Explain how adequate public and private facilities such as utilities, landscaping, parking spaces, and traffic circulation measures are or will be provided. And I answered that. Most restaurant business will occur after 5 o'clock. We are intending to open at 5 and stay open till about 11 o'clock. That's what our plan is. The businesses, the two adjacent businesses, one is a hair salon with one operator. She's independent, all by herself. And on the other side is a property management with one employee. So there's very little parking. I do have an advantage which could alleviate any parking problems if necessary, in that I own the property across the street, which is a United States Post Office, and I have over 35 parks over there that are not used. The post office uses most of them, and they close down at 5 o'clock at night. There's nobody using the facilities. I was holding that in abeyance, however. I didn't want to make too much conflict or make it too complex. I like simple things.
Well, actually, one of the cases that you've applied for is a parking reduction permit. So off-site parking, that would be a different permit.
Yes,
what you've
I
applied for is this.
That's why I did not want to get involved in that, to be honest with you.
And so far, what I'm hearing is you're going to operate a restaurant like any other restaurant, not a banquet hall.
Oh,
But that's what I'm hearing. You just want a full-service restaurant.
absolutely.
But
I mean, if you want to put down on one of the conditions, there will be no banquets. I mean, Glendale has a rule already, which I'm sure you're familiar of the 30% rule. And only 30% of the, as I read it, the seating area is allowed to be for banquet space. And that would limit us to about, 30 people? 35 maybe at max? For a reservation, not a banquet.
Well, but what I'm not hearing, though, is that what's unique about your restaurant use that makes it different? Otherwise, you're like any other restaurant use, and you have a parking requirement that you need to meet. A parking reduction permit says there's something unique about what you're proposing to do that the regular rules don't apply to you. You should have a special consideration. That's what I'm listening for.
My own honest opinion is we don't even need a parking reduction permit. I mean, we have adequate parking there. That's my belief. However, I understand that there's no saying, hey, I might sell the restaurant in 3 or 4 years, then somebody else will come in and do as they darn please. There has to be some protection for the city to back up their rules and regulations, which I wish they had been more stringent on with the previous owners, because I really think it's a shame what the previous owners got away with.
But you didn't police didn't police what was going on in your
You see-
property? I mean, you weren't aware of what they were doing on your property?
Well, they were only open probably on a Friday and maybe a Saturday night with reservations. And I was told, and I don't know the validity of it, but I was told that, and I guess it was from the newspaper, that city employees, including police officers, went there and wanted to go inside and see what was happening, but the previous owner would not allow them to enter the building. Now, I don't know how, as a police officer, I would think I would have a reason to go into a building and observe what is happening in there.
I guess part of our concern would be if it's your structure and it's going on and it's your property, and that's happened in the past, would that happen in the future? I can tell you that's the concern that we've seen in letters that have come from your neighbors. And so that's what I want to hear. How is it going to be different? We also have findings that you need to make for the sale, serving, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. That's findings 1 through 5. It's on your form.
For the
you really haven't gone through
all
any
I
of
can
those.
say is that the restaurant has had a number 47 license for probably over 50 years. And we have had no problem with the alcoholic and beverage control in obtaining a license. They're just waiting for us to settle things with Glendale so we can complete that transaction. One thing that I did mention when I was applying for my ABC license, they asked for what restrictions did they think I should put on the restaurant if I were to put some restrictions. And one that I put on was I do not want the patrons to be bringing alcoholic beverages to the property, which is, the corkage fee that many restaurants have. That is not right. And secondly, we do not have anything private, nothing private. If there is a small private group, then they can come, but it is open to the public. And that was the problem. That was one of the things that the city of Glendale was strict upon. They wanted it open, but the previous owners did not follow rules and regulations, and they should have been fined immediately when that rail went up or covering in the front. If that was illegal, go in, take it down, or we close you up. And I guess it's not that easy sometimes. Easily said, but a little harder to do.
Well, do you feel as a property owner you had some responsibility to make sure that things were operating correctly on your property?
You have to know the previous property owners. Not only them, but many times people, they think that when they get a license or an approval or a permit, that after they get that, they can do what they want. And my recommendation would be, if you have conditions placed on a applicant, that you have permission to come in, and if the applicant is violating any conditions or approvals, there should be steps taken immediately. I mean, like with a child, if he does something wrong, you just don't put it off for 3 weeks and say, now remember that.
So if this permit was granted to you and then let you operate for a few years and then perhaps have another operator come in, would you still keep an eye on it, or would you say, well, no, it would be something?
No,
that's
it should be written down that these are continuous. They go with the property, with the building, not with the owner.
Okay. Did you have anything else to add for the findings for the sale, serving, and consumption of alcoholic beverages?
I don't see anything, as long as the person serving the drinks is licensed or registered or has knowledge of what the rules are and the alcohol and how to stop someone and to make sure. The alcoholic beverage control makes sure that you are aware of all the rules and regulations, and they make you post signs and notify the patrons of the alcoholic problems.
And did you want to make your findings for parking reduction permit application? You have it on your form. You may wish to make the
On this
findings.
other one?
Yeah. Specifically related to the parking need for the land use is not as great as for similar land uses, or the parking requirements for the land use established in the zoning code is greater than what will be needed by the land use. That's one, and that should be on the form. And then the second one is, the intent of the parking regulations and compliance with all other applicable provisions of this chapter is met. And then three, and this is what we've heard a lot of testimony from, especially from your neighbors, is that sufficient parking would be provided to serve the use intended and potential future uses of the subject parcel. We've had a lot of concerns that have come in about overflow parking, and would that go in the neighbors? How would you handle that?
First of all, like I mentioned, if somebody were to park on the street that is parallel above us, which is Hermosa, and I think some of the participants here are probably from Hermosa, I think they would honestly say that they have perhaps a parking problem on their street because there are so many cars and everything. And we are not going to have, I mean, if somebody were to park in front on Hermosa, they would have to walk probably half a mile over on Hermosa, down La Crescenta Avenue, and all the way up on Honolulu. It's ridiculous even to think that anybody would go to a restaurant and have to walk that far. I did notice on the staff report here somewhere, it said that the closest public facilities are Crescenta Valley Park, which is a mile and a half away. I don't understand what they're talking about, the closest public facilities. We have public facilities right down the street from us on Honolulu Avenue. We have a library, we have a fire station. I don't know what they're referring to on page 3.
I believe it was some of the information that came from your parking study. That says these are the parking that are located, public parking areas located in the vicinity of your property. And it had quite a few of them.
there are public parking facilities.
But they're not right next to your...
They're not right next to me, but they're certainly not a mile and a half away.
I believe the closest was, I believe it was half a mile that was identified in the report.
Yeah, the closest is maybe half a mile.
I think people will walk a half a mile at night if you're...
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't expect
Well, that's my
them.
concern, too. If people won't walk a half a mile at night and you're operating
I'm not
from
even
5
getting
to 11,
into
that's
actually
why
the
we're
public
concerned.
parking.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, that's exactly the concern that we're having.
Well-
do you have anything else you wanted to add for your findings for your parking reduction permit?
We have, in the front of the building, we have the parking with a ingress and egress. And in the back of the restaurant, there is an alleyway, and cars can go either way on the alleyway, but they just don't seem to use the alleyway because the access in the front is so good. Next to us, I might add, is a building or a business that I wish wasn't there. It's wishy-washy clothes washing facilities, which is not the highest quality. And then next to that, there are two small restaurants. One is a Mexican restaurant, and I don't know what the other one is. And then you go up the street farther, and there are two bars. I would call them bars. Ours is not going to be a bar. Again, I reemphasize it's going to be looking at the menu, you can see that it's going to be a first-class steak house. Family-oriented. And as I said, we don't need all the space we have in there, but if you've been inside, have any of you been inside? If you have been inside, the place looks to me, it reminds me of the Bellagio in Las Vegas, if you've ever been to the Bellagio. I mean, it is ornate, it's decorative, it has chandeliers that, it has a 40-foot chandelier, if you can imagine a 40-foot chandelier by about 5-6 feet wide. And then it has another one about 25 feet long and another 5 feet wide, and it's got other chandeliers. It's going to be the show place. It's going to be an experience to go in there and eat.
Okay, but I heard you said that you would operate the restaurant even if it was reduced in size. That's what I heard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Or if you wanted to put a limitation on the number of people in there, without having us put up a almost impossible partition because of the ceiling heights. If you wanted to limit the number of people, I mean, it's 118. On one of my future conditions, where we limited it, we would limit it by about 30 to 40 people by the reduction in size. But we can't get into that right now.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to add in relationship to your parking reduction permit?
The only thing I want is honestly stated here.
Okay.
Wait, let me say it one more time here. We're asking to be fairly treated and not evenly remotely connected with the previous owners. And since they were granted a parking reduction and had the banquets, and then they were rewarded with both the two permits that I'm asking for. That's all I want is what they had and everybody else had previously, and I find it hard to see where you can approve it today and deny it tomorrow. That doesn't seem right to me. Are there any questions that? Now
No,
let's see
I don't have any further questions, but may I have the applications back?
Yes, I don't need them. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Roberta Medford.
Hi, I'm Roberta Medford. I live on Sycamore, which is south of the restaurant, and then I live a half a block east of La Crescenta. So I'm within easy walking distance of that corner. And the reason I came here today is because I guess in the newspaper I read a description of the proposed future restaurant, and it included a large stage area. That to me does not make me think typical family restaurant. I'm not used to going into a restaurant and having a large stage area. So yes, I'm a little suspicious as to the actual use of the proposed new restaurant. But after the owner's testimony, I feel like I now have to defend our very popular community restaurants, and I would like him to consider the longtime success of El Sol and Yaki's, which he is now referring to as down market, My family and I eat at those restaurants all the time. They're always crowded. They're delicious. They're affordable. And I would recommend something more along those lines for his space, because I believe that that is more fitting with the community. No local family that I know, and I get around a lot, is going to be coming and bringing their children for a $25 ribeye steak where you have to pay extra for the French fries. So, granted, this is completely off the topic of the parking, and I'm sorry, but I just wanted to speak about that. And if he really wants an ongoing, successful neighborhood restaurant, he should look at what is successful there. Thank you. And that goes double for the wishy-washy, which is a very important convenience for us, even who have our own homes and washing machines. Sometimes you need to utilize a laundromat, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that business there. Thank you.
Thanks. Would anybody else like to speak? Okay, I see nobody responding. Mr. Teichert, if you'd like to respond to that last comment. You have 3 minutes.
I'm sorry if I downgraded.
Oh, you need to speak,
Yakis
excuse me,
or-
you need to speak at the microphone, sorry.
I'm sorry if you thought I was downgrading Yakis and the El Sol, and because I eat there myself quite often, and the food is excellent. I go to El Sol, is it? El Sol, yeah. And as far as the stage area goes, if you want the stage, you can have it. I'll rip it out and give it to you. It is in there, and what we intended, we're not having bands. First of all, it's not a big area. It's a very small area. It's probably what, 8 by 12, something like that. Probably 8 by 12. 8 12s are 96. Less than maybe 100 square feet, let's say. And what we intend to do is to have a small a guitar player. I don't know if you know, his name is Carl. He plays at some of the local restaurants. He's an excellent vocalist in every possible language imaginable, and he plays a beautiful guitar, and he's a wonderful entertainer. One person, maybe possibly a small piano. That's what we intend to have for music. And the stage is 100, and we may be ripping the stage out anyway if we have to compromise on some space eventually. So, no big bands in there.
Did you include entertainment as part in your parking analysis? And where would, if you're going to have bands coming in?
No,
is that
we're
in there
not
at all?
having any bands or anything. And I would like to mention, I don't know, there have been never any complaints about noise in the area. The building is a great building in that it is not only the way it's situated, the kitchen is in the back, the patrons are in the front, and it is all covered with 5/8 inch sheetrock. And you can be outside, and you can be playing music inside, and you can't even hear it hardly outside, if at all. Are there any other concerns I could...
No, if anything else this is your last chance. Anything else you'd like to add?
Just what I have already expressed. I think I've expressed enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
With that, I will take this case under submission. The hearing is now officially closed, and thank you for coming.